if exercise was a pill, then every single person would be taking it, because it's just so incredible what it can do for your brain health, for your body health, so important.
Hey everybody, thanks so much for joining the First Optimal Podcast. Another great episode. Angela Foster joining us today. She is a health expert focusing a lot on women's health and really a lot of passion around longevity with women as a lifestyle. So we're going to get into that today, unpack a lot of myths and some facts, as well as some healthy tips and guides, and then how to plug into some of Angela's practices and content and resources. So really excited to have you on today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Joe. I'm excited to be here.
Well, we were talking a little bit before the recording started, and I was kind of just going through, been following some of your content for a while. A lot of really good practical tips, but most importantly, science-backed, specific, but applicable. And I'm always curious to hear a little bit about how someone like yourself got into this as a field and a practitioner, because for the audience out there, not that there's anything wrong with what I'm about to say, but there's kind of different characters online, right? There's the fitness influencer that maybe has a certain look and they're posting a lot about that. And again, there's some work that's being done there, I'm sure, to look away and present yourself a certain way. But then there's the kind of flashy, trendy person who's like whatever's the most latest, greatest, trendy news. And then there's folks like yourself that we try to really have in this podcast that are putting the time in to get into the details, get into the science, and give like practical, measurable advice that people can trust. And so that takes a lot of work. So walk us through, how did you get here? What brought you to this point?
It's quite a checkered journey, actually, because I originally was a corporate lawyer in London for many years, and I was working all hours, as corporate lawyers do, like completely neglecting many of the lifestyle habits that you and I both talk about, Joe. So, like skimping on sleep, in fact, pulling all-nighters to get the deal done, weekends of work, a lot of circadian disruption, surviving on coffee and protein bars when I was super busy. And then in my late 20s, I discovered I had PCOS and endometriosis, which kind of started me thinking about health. And I understood that PCOS was, largely a metabolic disorder at its core. So I then started to make some nutritional changes, had to have surgery, which enabled me to then have my 3 children. And then after my kids, I struggled with postpartum each time. And then after my 3rd child, that got really bad. And then 2 years later, I was diagnosed with major depressive disorder with bipolar episodes. And that was when I was in a really, really difficult spot. And I felt very trapped mentally. I think I'd created this prison in my own mind and was really looking for a way out, but not wanting to leave my children without a mother. So that was kind of the prison I was in. And that's when it took its toll on my immune health. And I ended up hospitalized with double pneumonia, both viral and bacterial. And I was neutropenic. My white blood cell count was so low. So that was a situation where I think, life takes you in one of 2 directions. That was really a fork in the road for me. And I remember the kids visiting me in hospital and me really having this really defining moment in my life where I connected with the love that I felt for them and the fact that they really needed a mother, and I needed to get on top of my physical and mental health. And so it's really interesting because once I then made a decision that I was going to get well and really, really get back on track, my white blood count started to rise within 48 hours and I started to heal. And it was pretty transformational because I had minimal lung damage. They never had to intubate me, which they were expecting. So I feel forever grateful for that experience. And I'm not saying it was an easy path on the way out. I've learned a lot. I think I have developed personally along that road. And then I decided I'd got my health back on track. So I kind of had these 2 parallel worlds where, I'd had high performance, but that was at the behest of my health. And then I now had taken time off work and got my health on track. And I wanted to find a way of bringing these worlds together because I realized it wasn't just me. There were other women like me. And that's when the concept of high performance health was born. And I started the podcast. I'd spent, years retraining. And yeah, and that's how it came to be. And then from there, it's kind of turned into really, I guess, a bit more of a movement to help women increase their health span, but also live their best life.
Oh, that's great. So, I appreciate you sharing that. While you were talking through it, I was just thinking about the timeline there. So, how much time was it between when you're in the hospital, versus the start of the high performance health podcast? Like, what was that
That was
range?
5 years.
5
Yeah,
years.
5
Okay.
years. 5 years of getting my own health back on track, and then also, retraining, researching, trying things. And then eventually I started the podcast in July of 2019, and then October 2019 was when I finally transitioned off what was actually pretty strong medication of not just antidepressant, but antipsychotic meds,
Mm.
to control for bipolar episodes. And yeah, that was, yeah, back
And
then.
when you're going back to the sequence of events that got you there, was that a lot of it, did you find, was it related to, like hormone health, like things related to PCOS, or was it, what were some things? Was it inflammation? What are some things that kind of led to that? I mean, obviously you're doing amazing now, which is great, but I'm sure it was a rough time frame in life to transition through that. But is there any
Yeah, it
things that you
was.
kind of
So
pinpointed?
I would say definitely immune health had been like I'd struggled with it. I had kind of repeated, even as a teenager, repeated chest infections. And then when I was working as a lawyer and things like tonsillitis. And then, when I had the children, obviously then things took a turn for the worse. I
Mm,
think my mental health was really playing a part in it. So I think immune health was one area that I really needed to focus on. I think significant circadian disruption
mm,
definitely also played a part. And I think that where I struggle, I think also like reflecting on this, because we know so much more now, kind of 10
right,
years on, than we did then. Just
sure.
understanding, the link between postpartum depression and things like the massive drop in hormones that we experience when we have a baby. And the first child, my first son, I tried to have naturally and then discovered I had pelvic disproportion. So I ended up having 3 cesarean sections, which are not easy to recover from.
Mm.
And then you have this very big hormone drop that I think affected me. Obviously, in my case, it went on for a very long time. So it became more than postpartum. But I think hormones were, yeah, a significant part of that.
Yeah, and I think, from at least anecdotally, kind of from what I hear from women a lot of times is, you mentioned you 3 children, right? And then some time went on after that, and it would the issues, um, continued, and you started to address them. But I often find a lot of times, at least from feedback I get from other colleagues and people like yourself and in their space, is that a lot of women are not making that association from, maybe some things that happened, have it be childbirth, or maybe a traumatic event or accidents or major surgery. And then it's 10 years later and they have all this still metabolic dysfunction, brain fog, extreme fatigue, things of that nature. And they're not really making it, connecting the dots of the two, that like, yeah, this was kind of a cliff we've been going off for some time now. And that's why we're
Mm.
getting to this point. And I think it's a really important, point of emphasis, I guess, to kind of, raise awareness to look at that. But I also think it's really interesting, the performance aspect, with women's health, because there are a lot of high performing women, and they may think that, I have to pick this or that, but it sounds like a lot of what you're focused on is kind of how to still be a high performer, but still have the family life you want and the health that you want. Do I have that right?
Yeah, 100%. And I think, that piece actually was that when I took time off, with my children, I actually had what I can now see was really an identity crisis of sorts, I guess. I lost my identity when I was no longer practicing as a lawyer, because that was everything that I'd known. And now I was someone's mom. There's
Mhm.
like,
Sure.
you even put, I don't know, but it's so often when you put phone numbers in your phone, you'll put the child's name and it's like, or put the parent's name, goes so and so's mom. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And I was
Right. Right.
getting
Right.
used to that. And I was like, who am I now? And I think the hardest part for me was when I was having significant psychological therapy, being told, you're doing too much. And it was taking my 4-year-old like an hour and a half to get me out of bed in the morning to get my kids to school. I'm not proud of that. And she was telling me I was doing too much when previously I was running multinational deals, and I couldn't get to grips with that. And that was a really difficult thing for me. And so I think really I had to rebuild my physical health, my mental health, my spiritual health, and develop that connection with myself and with others again. And so that was a real journey. And I don't think that I'm alone in that. I think there are so many women that struggle with that. And so that's why I feel so passionate about helping women achieve both. I think we can be loving mothers and spend time with our children
Right.
and really enjoy them and be present to those beautiful moments while also having something of our own and a career of sorts, whatever that is for you, that we can also enjoy. And that's what I'm really passionate is how can we bring those worlds together?
Yeah, no, I definitely want to get to the clients you work with and some of the specifics there and the details, but I'm just curious for you, like what were some of those first steps like to kind of start breaking through some of these struggles you're having? Like, could you walk us through what was kind of the first or second thing you did, and
Yeah.
how did that build so much momentum to get you to where you are today?
So there's quite a bit to unpack because there's the physical side and then
Sure.
there's the mindset side. If we're looking at the physical side first, and I know you do this so well, Joe, in your clinics, is looking at the functional medicine aspect. I had massive antibiotics, and
Mm.
I mean, before I got into hospital, obviously they had tried to treat me at home. So I'd had a series of antibiotics that wasn't working. Then I have them injected in hospital. And then when I came out, they were looking at repeating a CT scan to see the damage. And before they could repeat that, I had another chest infection. So there was more
Oh boy.
antibiotics and I lost, a lot of weight as a result. So initially it was about rebuilding myself back physically. And looking at how can I really fuel my body and paying attention to not just the, baby food or toddler food that I was doing, but also how was I going to fuel myself? So that was a really strong focus. And then looking at how can I introduce movement, knowing that fitness had always been a big piece for me. How could I get back on track and rebuild my fitness? Because I also was aware how much that made a difference to me psychologically. So I was
Mhm.
working on that. And then I was having therapy to really understand my thoughts. And cognitive behavioral therapy is very effective, but it's not an easy process. And you have to understand why you think things. I found Byron Katie's work, which was really transformational for me, her 4 questions. So if anyone's struggling, I would definitely encourage them to look at that and really start to analyze what you know to be true in your mind. And as Peter Crone says, who are you being to you? I think that's a really important question. And so really getting clear on my values and my belief systems and looking at as I started to progress, right, to get to this point where I wanted to move forward. What did that look like for me? Like what would my future self want of me if I really wanted to see my kids grow up and be happy? How could I facilitate that? What was the future version of me asking of me today? And so looking at that. So there was some pretty deep work going on because it was really in every area that I had to do that.
Yeah, and just for those out there, it was Byron Katie's 4 questions
Yeah.
are part of the work it's called, and then
Yeah.
correct me if I'm wrong. When we read off the 4 questions, is it true? Can you absolutely know that it's true? How do you react? What happens when you believe that thought? And then who would you be without the thought?
Yeah. And that's one of the, how do you react?
Yeah.
And then, like, first of all, acknowledging that you don't know it to be 100% true, right, is a big first step.
Yes.
And then thinking, like, how am I reacting? So, for example, understanding the feelings in my body, because at first you don't know. I knew I was depressed, I was struggling. And I think if I track back, actually, it wasn't just depression because where I was having the bipolar episodes, I would swing. So there would be days when I was super mum and I was incredible. The house was taken care of, the kids were happy, everything. And I felt so dialed in and I thought I'd healed. I learned over
Mm,
time that this was bipolar. And so what would then happen is that would precede an enormous crash. And
mm.
so then I was unprepared for that initially. So then I'd have to pick myself back up. And so those questions really helped me start to understand is what am I thinking here? And how is that feeling in my body? Like when she asked, how does that make me feel? What's the physical manifestation of that? And then such an empowering fourth question of like, who would I be without that thought? And I think that that's when you can then create the bridge to the future that you want, or at least that's what I was able to do with it initially. Like really starting to understand how it feels in the body, because we all know, we're all familiar, right, with that sensation of like you feel happy, everything's going fine, and then all of a sudden there's a discomfort, right?
Mm,
That discomfort is what can lead to dis-ease, right? Over time, you're not at ease, and that's how disease can manifest over a significant period of time, which happened in my case. So when you feel that feeling of discomfort, it's like moving back. There's a moment there to capture, like, what was the thought that preceded this
yeah.
feeling? And then you can start to do the work.
Yeah, that's so true. I went through I was in a men's group through our church actually, and I didn't know what the topic was, and just joined. And anyways, I backed into something that it was very similar, but it had a little different cycle, if you will. They called it the pain peace cycle. And one of the first things was like what what triggers you, and then what belief is in your mind about that trigger. And one of mine was being misunderstood. And then the next one was like, why was that a trigger for me? And I never thought about that. You know, it was like, this is 2 years ago. So like my wife was like, thank you, you know, because it's like, I've never thought about why does that. I knew it triggered me. When I
Mm.
feel misunderstood, it triggers me, and I start to get a little frustrated, and I want to over explain, and even could come across maybe combative a little bit, when really I'm just trying to clarify. I'm like, why do I care so much about that? Just let it play out, you know? Like,
Yeah.
what does it say about me? And that was really empowering. And listen, just for those out there too, I think, as Angela's doing, these are sensitive topics. They can be very personal and um, revealing, if you will. So I really appreciate you sharing these things, because these are topics I'm sure a lot of people aren't as comfortable openly talking through. So I think that the fact that you're turning this painful part in your life into such a positive thing for others now is just really cool and inspiring. So I knew some of your story, but not the depths of what you kind of were walking through. So I appreciate you sharing that, because I think it's definitely some encouragement for people out there if they're struggling right now listening to this. Um,
Thank you, Joe. And I'd say, so anyone struggling, it's easier for me to share because I've gone on that journey, right? It's very
right.
difficult when you're in the moment. And I think that I was also aware I didn't want to share it until I'd turned those wounds into scars, because it's important, right? People don't want to feel the disruption, if you like, of me at that time, because actually everyone's got their own problems going on. So if any like pieces of my story or journey you feel, then hopefully you can feel that there's also a way out. That's my hope by sharing it.
Yeah. No, for
Or a way
sure.
through, should we say, a way through.
Yeah. No, appreciate that. And then, see, as you started the podcast and you started working uh, with women, started to kind of realize like, oh, there's an audience out there. There's people responding to this. So now you have this validation that you're on the right track. What are some of the first things that maybe were surprising to you, um, as women started to interact with you with your content, or ask questions on the podcast, things of that nature? Were there things that maybe surprised you or you didn't think about before starting that?
I think that the thing that surprised me initially was just how much, as women, we're taking on in modern society, and
Mhm.
how sensitive our hormones are to that, and how we often put everyone else's needs before our own
Yes.
again, and don't consider that. And actually, I think women feel that it's too self-centered in many respects to put themselves first, but actually everybody is going to benefit when you can find that time, just little things that really value you or put your self-care first. And it doesn't have to be long periods. And I think so, as I went on that journey, I started to realize, there was a whole background for this disruption that I'd experienced. It didn't start with me having a cesarean section and developing postpartum depression. That's not where it started. It started, as I was explained to by the functional medicine doctor, with years of just putting work before my health, and there was a background really of probably like metabolic and hormonal stress that had really set the stage for what was to come. And also when I interviewed Dr. Sarah E. Hill, that was very transformational when I started to understand that, because of the PCOS and endometriosis, while it wasn't diagnosed until later, the doctors, the medical community have been very quick as a teenager to prescribe me birth control as a reason to resolve the fact that I wasn't having a regular menstrual cycle or was having heavy bleeding without looking into what the problems were. And what I understand from her work and her brilliant book is that, actually birth control at a young age can change the brain and predispose you to major depressive disorder, which is what I was later diagnosed with. And so it started as I interviewed more and more experts on my podcast and dove into their work. It started to become apparent to me what had happened and how I think it's not in a way not fair to women.
Yeah, no, and that's you started to unpack my next question, which is just kind of a curiosity for me. Clearly, I'm not a woman, so I don't know these things, but I just speculate. Like, if you think about I think there's a couple perfect storms. Obviously, it's no secret our food quality went down. Over time, we have to be much more selective and intentional. Activity levels went down just by the advancements in modern technology, and then maybe I'm wrong, but a lot of women I've talked to, or even I've had on the podcast, there's talk of like, just these unrealistic social pressures that maybe are intentional, maybe are not. But I find often, and a lot of this I can speak with even some of the women in my life, where it's like, their picture like super grandma, back that they remember. And they're like, well, I got to do all those things. But then they're like running a business. It was like grandma wasn't running a business and doing that. And then all these other things. And then they don't have a lot of the raw materials even to like get through some of that workload. And so I'm curious if do you find that it's a mixture, or is it more one or the other when it comes to like the social pressures, if you will, or unreasonable expectations versus, poor, unintentional, but poor healthy habits from exercise, nutrition, et cetera? Or is it a combination, or what are your thoughts there?
Well, I would say that from my audience and what I see, women are working really hard on their health. Like they really are putting in the effort. And I think that, all off to them because they're doing their best, not just for themselves, but also for their families. I think they're making a huge effort. I think what's happening is that there is so much stress and there's this invisible load that they're being asked to take on. I think when we look at most women are really trying to educate themselves, but there's a massive information on social media. It's sound bites, it's small clips, and they're trying to piece it together. They're very invested in listening to podcasts where they can get more information and dive deeper, but they're trying to bring that information together and implement it into their lives. And I think they just need a little bit more help with it and someone to say, when I do like quite a bit of corporate training and with leadership teams, and we'll go through what the science is of having that high energy and resiliency, and good hormonal health. But then it's like, okay, practically, how do I apply it? And what they want is someone who can say, this matters, this doesn't. Here's the quick step, right, that you need to do, and how you can fit it into your busy life. And I think that's where women really do need more support because they're doing the best they can. And they're often thinking about their children as well. And they're carrying this invisible mental load. And then on top of that, as you say, they've got the pressure of like, combining careers, household, families, and then actually show up looking good while they're doing it. That's just
Right.
an extra
Yeah.
pressure, right, on women. And so it's a lot.
Yeah, I think it's a great point because even with my background, my wife was a college athlete and knows quite a bit about health and things, but she's never formally been trained or went through anything of that nature as far as like a practitioner. She was a coach and did very, very well as a coach in a swimming world. But I found as our daughters started to grow, I'm like, I'm asleep at the wheel here with their health. Like I need to help out more because she was not only trying to be healthy herself, but also trying to make healthy decisions for three people. And then luckily I'm pretty basic what I want, but she also had to think of like, if she was the one preparing food and such while juggling other things, like what does my husband want too? So I think for the men out there, it's an opportunity to just consider that and step up and say, hey, can you help with that? Because I just picture, we go, our girls are a little bit older now. We try to teach them why we shop the way we do, or why certain things we have in our household and other things we don't. And then now they help more with pointing that out. But that's just as you're describing it, I'm like, that alone is just, triple the work compared to what I had to do at different phases in our, in our marriage. And it wasn't ill intended. I just didn't think of it, And so,
Yeah.
um, yeah, I used to get the text message like, "Did you remember to feed the girls?" So, I'm like, "Yes, I did." And then I'd look around like, "No," but that was in the early years. I think I'm okay now, and my 13-year-old knows how to cook, so I think we're good. But, but yeah, no, I appreciate you kinda jumping into that a little bit, and I wanted to kinda work our way towards, current clients and what that journey looks like when someone is going through one of your, either a program or coaching. um, how do you approach things? Do you look at certain things, you test first and then get into nutrition and then activity and or exercise? Is it a combination of everything? I know we're painting with a broad brush here, kind of just generalizing, but what does your approach with women's health look like when someone's first engaging with you, assuming they're in a rough spot, not in a rhythm, or trying to do things, but maybe you see some things to clean up?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So because I focus on the kind of high performance end of the market and longevity and health, I tend to see a healthier section of the population because they're
Mhm.
already doing quite a lot of the right things. The main thing would be their stress resiliency and their hormone health. Obviously, that also then does impact their gut health. But to the extent that I need to, I will involve a functional medicine doctor, for example, like yourself or your clinic, to really dive into that side of optimization. What I look at more is how can we really achieve, you know, a great health span to match your lifespan so you can enjoy life to the max. And so we will then look at blood work as part of it for sure. I'll also test things like their VO2 max because that is one of the key pillars of longevity. They'll do some strength testing to see where they fall on that. As part of the blood work will be pretty comprehensive, so we can get a really good look at what's going on. We look at sometimes at biological aging if that's something that they want to do. So we can see some of that through the fitness testing, the DEXA scan, the VO2, yes, the strength, all of those things, and then looking at their body composition. And then we will start working together on their goals. So generally people will have a goal that they want in life, right? We're all looking for more freedom and time. That's free time to spend with our family, our friends, to pursue our careers or businesses. I work quite a bit with entrepreneurs. Is how can we really support your energy so that you can perform at the highest level and live your best life? So we'll look at things like mitochondrial health and things like that, so that alongside. So initially it's like gathering data and wearable data is also really important. So we track closely their deep sleep, their REM sleep, their resting heart rate, their HRV, which is the variation between heartbeats, which we want to see more variability there and resiliency, and we'll track that. But also I'll look at their respiratory rate, because a lot of clients that I see, for example, I can see their stress through their sleep because they might have a really high breathing rate at night, and that tells me that their nervous system is not relaxed. And then obviously we want to rule out anything else like sleep apnea. But I'm very much data driven, but also like spiritual in nature at the same time, because I think
Sure.
that holistic health is the whole piece.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And so if we start to kind of unpack a few of the points there, I'd like to start. We can start anywhere, but just what popped in my mind. So feel free to change it. It was, in the area of sleep, I would imagine um, it's probably similar with men and women, but you're dealing specifically with women, like the ability to shut off their mind or being overstimulated during sleep or having struggles falling asleep. What are some first steps you take with somebody if you're finding that everything's kind of downhill, like the sleep is off, therefore circadian rhythms off, stress hormone response, blah, blah, blah. It's just kind of, you know, our bodies are wonderful like that. There's never just one problem. It's always a cascade effect. So what is what are some things you do to help someone in that state that's just such very high functioning, kids are in
Mm.
travel sports, they're all over the place, they're
Yeah.
C-suite, whatever, high performers, right? Whatever that, however you want to define that. Just curious to your approach to that.
So this is, and do you know, it's such a great question. I'm really glad you've asked it because it doesn't get asked a lot when I'm interviewed, and it's really, really important because the standard stuff that you hear about that is great for your health, and I want you to have exceptional health, is often almost impossible for the women you've described there to do. And I'm glad
Mm,
you pointed out that often their kids are also doing different clubs and sports after school, because this idea that you're going to have a 12 to 14 hour overnight fast and you're going to finish eating around 6 or 7 p.m. and then you won't eat until like 8 a.m. the next day, but you'll always make sure you have breakfast and you'll always make sure you have protein, and all these things become so like difficult for women because it's like, but I'm not even making it home from the athletics club with my child until 8:30 at night, and then
right.
you kind of want me in bed by 10. So how's all that going to fit together, and how will I still have a 3 hour gap from the last meal before I go to bed? It feels really impossible. And so the first thing I would say to anyone listening to this, please don't feel overwhelmed, because there's seasons in life, right? And we're not looking for perfection. There's going to be a time in your life when you absolutely can do that, but this might be not the season when you can. And so what we have to then look at is, we know that that's good for deep sleep. We know it's good for autophagy. We know it's good for lowering inflammation, giving the gut a rest. So we've got to like work around that and optimize the evening meal as well as we can so that you can have better deep sleep and you're not digesting, so that we're not kind of interfering. When melatonin starts to be released, we know we become less insulin sensitive. So it's like looking at the composition of that meal that would support you, looking at when does this particular woman have time to exercise? Because if they're like me and it's 5 o'clock in the morning, then how are we going to support that? Because and what type of exercise, and how will we fuel post training and things like that? So I'm so glad you asked that, Joe, because I think that this is where I say women feel overwhelmed, right? Because they hear these things and they go, oh my God, I need to do this and I need to do this and this and this and this. And it's
Right.
like, but how on earth is that going to fit with my life and my kids? And I just think we need to take a little bit of pressure off ourselves. So we're going to do the things that we can get right. Yeah.
Mhm.
And they go a long way. Like when I tested, there's a test you can do, glycanage, which tests like your immune system and inflammation to give you a biological age of how's that functioning according to they'll give you a chronological age and that, but then how is that from a biological aging point of view? And it's by getting the majority of things dialed in and right that gives me a biological age in my 20s when I'm 49, not doing everything right and being
Right.
perfect. But obviously, like someone like myself who's a lawyer, we want to dot every I and cross every T. That's our instinct. We're perfectionists in nature. And that's true of so many high performing women. And I think part of this is giving ourselves a bit of a break and going, right, okay, how can we dial this in the absolute best way we can? And then we'll build on it from there, in accordance with what's going on in that season of our lives.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of good like nuggets in there, because I want to come back to a couple other follow-up questions, but I just want to make one comment too about, you mentioned a lot of things you mentioned, but one that popped in my head was about the effects of like insulin sensitivity and the lower melatonin production. These are things of why for people out there, like working with a coach like yourself who's done the due diligence, who understands how these things cause an effect across the whole day or the whole week, are so important, because you hear it a lot with high performers. Well, I only need to sleep 4 hours a day, or 5 hours, and I'm good. Maybe there's some small percentage of the population that is fine. I'm just for the sake of discussion though. But they're like, I'm really struggling because I overeat carbohydrates, or I always have these massive cravings that like I cannot get out of and whatever. And it's like, well, like, and not saying it's only that, but perhaps if we worked on this sleep thing, maybe those may go down. Like I noticed personally, I was still have my struggles. I've slipped to more natural. That could be a whole nother podcast episode talking about my sleep struggles. Falling asleep is my issue. Um, but I was on Ambien for 10 years, because couldn't shut it off. But I did notice when I wasn't sleeping, just the amount of carbohydrate intake and was so high, because I just crave. And it was, definitely a big change whenever I have my sleep more under control, and it's so much easier and manageable because I think a lot of people also beat themselves up when they cheat on a diet or eat. And like you said, like it's not, you're not a robot, you're human. Like it's going to happen. You're going to have those days, like just keep rolling on. You're going to have those meals, like just the next meal, do better,
Yeah,
and so I just
so
was
true.
kind of processing that. So,
One thing I've found there, Joe, as well, that makes a difference as well is there's the sleep piece, and then there's this like going from one thing to the next, as women often do, right? They finish and then it's like, right, I'm straight into the school run and then I'm into this, and then wonder why in the evening they're craving carbs or they're craving wine. And it's your body's and your mind's way of just saying, I just need you to slow down. And there's a surefire way of doing that, which is a glass of wine. You get this beautiful immediate release of GABA. You're not going to go back to work after that. Do you know what I mean? And you're going to be forced to stop doing everything else in the house and actually take some time. And I think understanding that and looking like, okay, where can we put micro breaks into your day? Where
yeah.
might you be able to, like, morning light is a great one. Always go out. That sets the circadian rhythm and that hormonal cascade. But also, what about between meetings or you're taking a phone call? Could you go for a walk? Because when you go for a walk, it reduces stress and it also just clears the mental filing cabinet, right? There's some neuroscience behind this. And so
Yeah.
you're going to slow that thinking, going to get clearer thinking again. And so I think there's just little micro habits that we can do that don't add lots of extra time. In fact, they give you back time.
No, it's such a great point. You're spot on because um the science says it, right? But also I can just say from personal experience, like I remember as a smart aleck little punk 20 something year old trainer saying to my clients, like, no, walking isn't working out. Like you need to do your, this type of cardio at this heart rate and blah, blah, blah. And I thought I had it all figured out because I was, 22 years old and had no other care in the world but working out, eating good, and lived a pretty easy lifestyle. And then now, my 40s, my wife and I, like we started a few months ago. We've done it on and off. We started a few months ago committing to a daily walk every morning, and we work together a lot. So it's kind of a nice like set of the day, and it's massively changed. And even for her, um, I've noticed some other differences, but like she was at this like weight loss um block, and like all of a sudden I want to say it was 7 pounds she said the other day. Like that's the only thing we changed. But I think it was a lot of the, you know a combination obviously of some body fat, but then also like inflammation and just better digestion. And they weren't bad, they just weren't optimal. And so it
Mm.
was such like, that's why I tell people is like a lot of times friends or people who reach out to me through a contact and they want a thing like, what should I buy, what treatment should I get on? I'm like, well, how about you start walking, how about you get some sunlight, drink enough water, blue lights. Let's shut off the blue lights. What else do you have access to? Whatever the case may be, maybe a couple other free things. Do that for 2 weeks. And they're like, what? I'm like, yeah, I know I'm terrible for my own business because we sell solutions that could help, but do all the free stuff first for a while because you're going to find that's going to move the needle the most. And then if you want to add something else, it's more of you get more of a return on it, I guess, if that makes sense. But
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I couldn't agree more. I think like the free stuff is so underrated, right? Because it just doesn't look sexy on social media, but it's so
exactly.
important.
Yeah, I'm jealous of all the million plus followers that have built entire careers on just talking about sunlight and walking. It's like, dang it, why didn't I think of that? No. Um, but I did want to ask about, I noticed like some of your content you have, one is women are more sensitive to blue light than men. And I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about maybe some of the top, I don't know how many, one, two, three, differences in like men and women's health that maybe women would be struggling with. Obviously, you can talk about the blue light differences that you posted about.
Mm.
And I encourage everybody to check out Angela Foster's Instagram, which we'll have all in the show notes and stuff. But because you got a bunch of those examples, but can you walk through maybe a couple of your top ones that kind of nuances between like men and women and differences in health?
Yeah, for sure. I'd love to. So there is, as you mentioned, like the differences in blue light that comes up. So I think women have to be more careful in the evening about, restricting that blue light exposure, putting lamps on, not using too much overhead lighting. An easy one here that I see women that I used to fall foul of myself, right, which is why I kind of picked up on it, is that, and I'd seen it with my clients, is, I'll put my blue light blockers on, but then they forget that they're not actually ready for bed. And so you go into a bathroom which has really bright lighting in quite
Yeah.
commonly, and then you're cleansing, taking off your eye makeup and things like this, and you're just suddenly exposing yourself to this. So what I would say is, take your makeup off, all that stuff, then put your blue blockers on, because you can still brush your teeth with those on. So you can start to really kind of calm your nervous system, and understanding that when we look at perimenopause, one of the first hormones to drop is actually melatonin around the age of 35, right? Ahead of things like progesterone. So that's a difference. And I think just understanding that and realizing that you need to put your circadian rhythm, like we've been speaking about, front and center, is going to be is really, really important. I think then another difference is obviously that we go through as women multiple changes in our hormones across our lifespan. So, we have our menstrual cycle, and we have different varying levels of hormones. It's not the same as men, who generally speaking have high testosterone in the morning if they're regulating everything well. And then it kind of goes, so they have high testosterone and higher cortisol, and then it kind of comes off during the course of the day. As women, we're cycling and our hormones are changing, but then think also how much we're changing when we then fall pregnant. That's a completely different experience. Right. And then postpartum, like we spoke about, and its impacts on mental health as well. And then we might do that multiple times. And then when we're just done with that, we think, oh, I can kind of chill now. You go through perimenopause and it just opens up this whole new world of potential chaos. And so I think understanding that, and understanding that our health risks increase as we go through that menopause transition. So we need to account for those. We see increased risks in things like cardiovascular disease and dementia risk and things like that. So how can we be protective and preventative in our compliance with our healthy behaviors for our health outcomes, right? So we know, I think it's something like, I read that men, a woman who isn't using menopause hormone therapy, generally post-menopause, a man will have something like 10 times the estrogen of a woman. So it's like we need to pay attention to that, and start thinking, if it's appropriate, about a conversation around hormone therapy, but then looking at what does that impact, the lowering of estrogen, what impact is that having across the female body? And it's things like increased inflammation, increased cortisol levels, higher rates of oxidative stress. We know that we see less mitochondrial DNA replication. That's a long way of saying your energy is going to go down, ladies, right, if you don't take care of your mitochondria. So I think then working with a coach who understands, and nutritionist and personal trainer, like somebody who can guide you through this and say, okay, right, do you know what? This is how we're going to improve your mitochondrial health so that you have high energy. This is the kind of food that we're going to do, and stress management practices to reduce inflammation. This is how we're going to fuel your body with loads of antioxidants to reduce that oxidative stress burden on the body. These are the things that we can do. If you're really stressed, this is how we can improve resiliency, because we can't change the stress in your life. Just like when we were talking about sleep, not many of my clients, if I said to them, I want you to go sleep 8-9 hours a night, they'd be like, yeah, great. How do I do that with 3 kids and a career? It's like, that all sounds amazing, but it
Yeah,
might not
hire
be
me, and that's my
possible.
email to you. Sleep 8 hours.
Yeah,
See you in a month.
exactly. They're more likely, it's like, actually, do you know what? I'm going to be woken up. So what can I do? Some nights I get woken up. What can I do to compensate for that for
Yes.
sleep? How can creatine help me? How can I dial in that I actually become an efficient sleeper? So even if I'm getting 6.5 to 7 hours some night, how can I still get my deep sleep and REM sleep metrics dialed in? How can I get my resting heart rate to lower at the right time? All of those things are within your control. And we can work on those together. So I would say those are 2 areas. And then also just I'd say the stuff that's going on, just the amount of stuff that we have as women, but the parallel to that is we just make the best communities. Like I love my community. I love how the women are so supportive of each other, champion each other. And I just think that, again, is such an important thing for lifespan and health span, that's a really beautiful thing. So, and we are, as women, we are meant to go out and seek other women. That is good for our health. So that would be another difference as well.
No, it's something I talked about a little bit the difference between men and women. Like with men's health, it's funny because we don't, not funny. It's that I'm just using that as a phrase or whatever. But it's like we don't talk anywhere near as much as we should. But you're absolutely right. Like women with the community piece, men need to model that more. But on the other hand, women are always fascinated about how, at least the women in my life, like how you haven't talked to him in 7 years and you just ran into him and you guys like hit it off, like right where you left off. I'm like, I don't know. I guess our brains are this so simple. We're just like, we can just pull from that last experience and just pick up and go. And it's like, why don't I talk to this person more? But, um, I did want to get a little bit into, I think you made a really good uh, point in supplements, or dare I call them hacks, right? Of like, women when, and I want to make a couple statements first and then kind of get to my question, I guess, but women where um, they're high performers, they're doing some research, they're educated, right? So they can follow the crumbs as far as like what can I plug into my routines, but they're also dealing with a 24-hour hormone cycle, 28-day hormone cycle, and then more of a cliff as midlife comes in versus men that are more progressive drop off, generally speaking. Um, and then there's this whole thing of like supplements and adding these different nutrients in. But often what I find, and I've had a lot of experience with doing like micronutrient testing and things like that. And this is where I think coaching comes in, because I'll see a lot of women where they're taking something and they're taking something else. They're both good, but they both fight for the same receptor site. And one they have enough of, and one they don't have enough of. And then, but they're taking a massive amount of both. And it's like, well, we're kind of, wrestling with that. And so I wanted to use that framework. Hopefully I'm describing it the best I can here, to transition to like, you have a post about the exact supplements, take every day as a high performing health coach for midlife women. And you're talking about these different supplements, but I think it's important to maybe walk through just some examples of application, do's and don'ts. And what do you see? Like you mentioned, we can maybe start with creatine. You mentioned like creatine and how that applies, and then any other ones that are kind of your go-to generally. I'm just curious to what your approach is there.
That is such a good question. Do you know, I'm actually doing a masterclass next week just on like supplements and how to kind of personalize your stack, because I see women as well. The other thing I see, and I think it's probably true of men and women, it's just maybe women buy more supplements, is they have often a cupboard, a supplement cupboard or drawer that's just like stacked, and they don't know what they're taking or why they're taking it. And
Yeah.
probably half the time they're not actually taking it in reality. So they're not getting the results from it. But also sometimes what will happen is they will be having massive doses of some things that are overlapping in a variety of areas that can end up just exacerbating something like a dysfunctional cortisol rhythm, because they're just taking so many things that are de-stressing and almost sedating them. And then it's not actually helping them stay asleep, but they really are feeling sluggish. And so I like to go with, despite what has happened with farming, a food first approach, because I think we do
Yeah.
need to go food first. And then looking at, okay, what are the things that we know, a bit like it's been very well researched that the Mediterranean diet, and by this I mean the kind of clinically studied Mediterranean diet version, is probably comes out as the best form of nutrition for the most number of people. Not necessarily
Mm,
for everyone, but for the most.
sure.
I think there are also some supplements, I don't know about you, Joe, that for the most number of people are also good. And one of those, for example, would be omega-3 fatty acids. So we
Hmm.
know how important that is. Creatine, as you already mentioned, really good, not just for muscle and power and things. It seems to be bone preserving or possibly even enhancing, but also brain energetics. And we were talking about just how many decisions women make, how much under pressure they are, how they're not always getting the best sleep. That's where I think creatine monohydrate just has a really strong place. And I know that, especially in midlife, I feel way better when I'm taking it. Um, Vitamin D for many people is a big one. If they're living in the northern hemisphere, they need vitamin D with K2. So that would be another one. And then I think magnesium is one that you need, actually, magnesium, in order to utilize your vitamin D properly. But it's also very important for overall health. And so I think there are some that fundamentally everyone benefits from. And so those would be where I would start. And then then we look at, okay, are there specific areas that you might also want to dial in? So, for example, some women need, they need iron, particularly if there's a lot of blood loss. And actually, iron's a super common one. But don't go and start taking loads of iron, particularly if you're postmenopause or if you haven't tested, because then that could be, too high. And that's very much a Goldilocks one. So I think, if you're having problems, for example, we know that insulin sensitivity often goes down with perimenopause, not in all cases. And if you're doing the right things with your fitness and resistance training and high intensity and things, you might have that really well dialed in, or you might not. And that's why we look at blood biomarkers. So then it's like, okay, do I need some support in addition to changing my nutrition and fitness, like berberine or something like that, or inositol, which is really good. I think glycine is another one that, like, for most people, I'm a pretty big fan of, because I think we're like told to eat a lot of protein, and so we're getting a lot of methionine. And I think having that glycine, unless you're having bone broth and things like that, I think is really important. And also it helps with insulin sensitivity. It helps cool your body temperature at night. So like I'll put a teaspoon of glycine in some chamomile tea. There are certain ones that I think can be really helpful for many people. But I think that making sure you look at labels and that you're not crossing over as well is really, really important. And then understanding the supplement company that you're using. There's a lot of like companies looking at, enhancing NAD, and maybe they're showing that NAD levels increased. Great, but are they increasing in the blood, or have they been shown to increase cellular NAD? Because that's where you need it, is in your cells. And so I think getting clued up on this is actually really important, so that and then if you've got issues that you're actually targeting, go work with someone like yourselves, go work with a functional medicine doctor who can actually help you and really look in detail at what you need.
Yeah, no, I think it's it, I think just selecting the right types is so important, and then understanding the application, because oftentimes, as you mentioned earlier, there's 20, 30 bottles built up into the
Yeah.
cabinet. And I know even myself, if I don't sleep as much, I'll load more creatine as like a little bit of a cognitive hack in the day to kind of help me get through that, or things I'll do proactively that are more likely to flush out things that would cause a potential headache. You can call them biohacks, but I just think it's just more, I don't think it's anything massively different. It's just knowing how the body works and knowing like, oh, I just did this, or I was using some kind of high focus, high energy work where, and I didn't have a lot of B vitamins in my diet. So maybe I supplement a B vitamin at in the afternoon or something, acutely, not that it's every day, because perhaps, one day I have more, or maybe I use some kind of nootropic or approach for helping my focus that day. And therefore my vitamin B is going to be burned through a lot faster because of the type of work I'm doing, or just, there's a lot of nuances there, but I think it's important for people to, you know, look at the application in each area, which is obviously so key. So, um, I did want to ask a little bit about, um, you're talking about longevity and lifestyle, and what are some things you're implementing now with people listening to your podcast or looking for some services, as far as that, like a younger kind of longevity lifestyle implementation? Like what are some either services or tools or resources you're providing to people to help with that?
So we offer a variety, really. So, for example, if someone just wants to like get started and get more familiar with everything I'm doing, kind of stay up to date, then we have a newsletter that we send out once a week called Fresh Start, and this is actually based on Dr. Amy Milkman's research, which it's really interesting, because when you look at New Year's resolutions, everyone goes, "Oh, they don't work, they don't work." But actually, if you look at the number of people that follow through, more people do follow through as a result of a New Year's resolution than any other time of year. And so
Mm.
what her research shows is that when we're given a fresh start, we are actually more likely to follow through on the changes. So we treat every single Monday as a fresh start, because it's the beginning of the week. And so you get 52 chances every year to make, something a new habit. And so on a Monday, we will share some science and then share a fresh start action for that week. And that's very easy. You can sign up on my website for that, or you can go to angelafoster.me/fresh start, and then you'll start implementing these healthy behaviors. We also have my membership, Live Younger, which really came about by me realizing just how many women were overwhelmed by the information, the amount that's out there. And so we started that to help women make longevity a lifestyle. And that's where we dive into the implementation, both the science and the implementation of many of the things that we've been talking about. And then we also have another hormone course for women who are going through perimenopause. And that really is to help, like, over 21 days to educate women on exactly what's going on through perimenopause and how you can start to dial in the things we've been speaking about. So how you can lower inflammation, how you can manage your cortisol and circadian rhythm that much better, things that you can do naturally to support your changing hormones, and then also where hormone therapy has its place, looking at improving insulin sensitivity, how should you train as a woman, right, in terms of your fitness. And so we go into deep on the science with a daily video every day for 21 days to really help you dial that in. And all of that is over on my website, angelafosterperformance.com.
Awesome. Yeah. And for those listening to audio, I do have it pulled up here on the video. And we'll have this in the show notes, some direct links to these, so that if you're listening on audio, you can just click on those and check these out. And yeah, it looks like, just kind of what, as you're describing it, getting into hormone awareness and self-leadership, fuel vitality, cognitive resilience and clarity, embodying strength, movement, and energy, and then the reset for nervous system recovery rituals. I think it's really, each one of these pillars could be an hour-long podcast. So I won't
Yeah.
get lost in the weeds too much with asking follow-up questions on that. But I do think it's really interesting. Sorry, I was clicking and that my brain skipped a beat there. The 21 days, because I think that's a really good approach to layer in information with people. Like, I find that sometimes if I get excited, or someone on our team gets excited, where we'll create like this awesome ebook or something, and it's like, I give it away free, and it's like 40 pages and no one reads it because it's like, it's just too much at once. But the drip campaigns are spreading it out and giving practical things. And so you're saying you do videos in your emails as well, or that's what you do?
No, not in our email. So the emails are kind of they're written and they're
Gotcha.
science, and then we also link, like we do another Friday email. Once you're on the list, you'll receive that all about the podcast that we've done that week, and we share you direct to like timestamps and things, so you can go listen to those bits. But in the 21-day hormone reset program, that involves like a 10 to 15-minute video every day, so that you can slowly like listen to it and implement as you go.
And what would be an example of what's one of those, what's included in one of those 10, 15-minute videos? I'm just curious to like what kind of things people are walking away with.
So yeah, every single like day is obviously something different, but we talk
Sure.
about, for example, how to understand inflammation in the body. We talk about brain fog and how to minimize it, how to improve your brain energetics. We talk about, for example, the difference between how to improve your muscle mass and your insulin sensitivity. We talk about what you should kind of test as a midlife woman to see where you're at, and then how you can improve on that. And then sometimes I also will run that program live. So then that involves some live support calls as well.
Oh, that's great. That's awesome. Yeah, and I'm curious too. Just, I know we're getting close on time here, but I wanted to selfishly hit you up for a few more tips and pointers. But I think the first one I wanted to ask about is specifically in like women's approach to exercise. Resistance training, cardiovascular. I'm wondering a couple of questions. One, are there differences that you see maybe women are making? I don't want to say mistakes. Maybe women are not as efficient as they could be. And what would be, I guess my first question would be like, what would be something that you commonly see that you have to maybe help them adjust in their approach to exercise and or cardio or resistance, or both? Just curious your thoughts there.
I think one of the things I see is that women they'll try and sort of Well, there's a few things. So one is they'll go to classes and they'll kind of incorporate all their cardio and their weights and everything into the one session. And then they'll might say they're not seeing anymore the body composition results, particularly in midlife. And that's when I start to encourage them to go, okay, what we need to do is actually really dial in the goal that you have for whatever this block is. If we take, for example, 6 weeks, are we looking at improving your muscle mass? Are we looking at improving strength? Are we more focused on VO2 max? And we want to support all of those things all of the time, but we might major on one over a
Yes.
6-week block, and then you can go and switch and major on another one, so that we know that we are progressively overloading that musculoskeletal system, or we're progressively overloading in terms of cardiovascular system. And I think that's really important with enough recovery, and it needs to be built up, over time, so that we reduce the risk of injury, and also support energy and vitality. And we can look at things, as we mentioned before, heart rate variability. So I'd say that's one thing. Or women who have traditionally done things like Pilates, for example, and they're not maintaining the levels of strength as they go through midlife, then we need to look at that and introduce a bit more loading, to help them. I think as well, some women naturally over that time may have lost some cardiovascular fitness. And so it's like, okay, how can we build that up? But also, how can we make the most of your time? Because
Right.
what we don't want to do is we don't all have endless hours and hours and hours, do you know what I mean, to train. And I think, personally for me, morning exercise has just been a godsend, particularly coming off medication and really taking charge of my mental health. And that's me personally. I think it helps a lot of people. But it's about finding out what works for you and what you love and enjoy. But we know that, I think it was Robert Butler of the Institute for Anti-Aging in America said, if exercise was a pill, then every single person would be taking it, because
Yes.
it's just so incredible what it can do for your brain health, for your body health, so important. And so I think that really understanding and educating yourself on how to exercise properly, in a way that fits with your lifestyle, is fundamental if you want longevity.
Yeah, and I think a lot of good stuff you said there, but I did want to emphasize one key point, because even those of us, and I'm sure you maybe not, but I would lean towards you probably felt the same way at some point, where we know so much, but we get overwhelmed with wanting to be the perfect recovery protocol, the perfect training, the perfect this, the perfect that. And I think the block approach in everyday people, what I mean by that is someone who's not getting ready for a competitive event, like, not even a fun run or something. But I think that block approach is a really good approach. You mentioned 6 weeks there. I'm sure there's nuances. Maybe sometimes you do different periods of time. But number one, I think it keeps people excited, because they're doing something different or a different focus. But also, you're not always taking away what they love. Like you mentioned, Pilates. I notice for me, I'll just use an example. My strength was really good, because I was a strength athlete for most of my life. I got into jujitsu and had no mobility and could not move at all, and so I like needed to change it. So I loved strength, so I would only do it like once a week, or sometimes even every other week, because I was doing so much mobility, functionality, working on. And then I started working on the actual jujitsu training, which I still was getting a lot of strength benefits, but it gave me the freedom to say, it's okay. I can set the like hardcore explosive training, very, very dialed in over here. Just do it every once in a while for fun at a safe, rep range or intensity level, because I'm not trained to do that. Well, I focus on these other things. And then when I go back to it, I'll probably be that much better. And I think that's so applicable to women in women's health as well, because I got to do my 7 hours of cardio a week, and I have to do my whatever. But like as you were mentioning, if you're doing a lot of Pilates, maybe you still do some Pilates because you really love it and you got the community piece. But let's add in some resistance training at a higher intensity level and more of a progressive overload to help counteract some of the things that maybe your body's not getting from that training. Do I have that right? Is that somewhat what you do in your approaches there?
Yeah, 100%. And I think, like, as you've mentioned, like flexibility is really, really important, and being able to move across a range of planes and movements, right? I think also when we look at like cognitive health, like playing a sport, for example, has been shown to improve things, learning new skills. I think that, yeah, we want to, even when we look at when you look at it from a functional medicine point of view, like jumping has been shown to improve lymphatic flow and detoxification. Yep. And we know that the lymph doesn't have a pump, so we need to do that. The research in relation to bone health seems to be a combination, and it's not clear which one is stronger, I think, whether it's plyometric or actually loading of that musculoskeletal system. And so we want to do both to try to improve bone density alongside the right nutrition. So yeah, I think it has to be multimodal. And I think that that's where in my Live Younger community, what we're doing is teaching you the principles so you understand, and then you can apply it, because you can go and buy, and I love some of the online trainers, I do them myself, and it's nice when you don't want to think about it to just go buy a plan. But I think also educating yourself so that you understand why you're doing things can be really helpful and just give you reassurance, and you can start to track. And then, as a female, for example, when you can do a chin-up or a series of chin-ups yourself, that feels really empowering. And what I then see is as women get stronger, they feel that confidence, their posture, the way they show up, everything is different. And so it's just a whole body system.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on with that. And you mentioned one thing, one of the things too that you mentioned, like running and jumping. Like I don't recall the stat. I wish I had it at my fingertips, but it was some massive stat. Like it was a very, very high percentage of men and women, but they don't sprint or jump past, I think it was the age of 30 or 35 was one of the studies, and it was a super high percentage. And they were talking about like just doing those basic modalities and how much they help with all the things you just mentioned. Of course, again, another term you brought up earlier, I just want to reemphasize from what you're saying for our audience, is progressive overload. So maybe you're jumping on like a 6-inch block, which seems crazy, or 12-inch, but then you can work your way up. We're not saying go and, look at the most trending reel of how high the person jumped and try to do that if you haven't jumped in 10 years, but, having some kind of approach to that, to work that in. And I think those are all really, really great nuggets. So appreciate that. For everybody out there who's listening, as I mentioned, we'll have show notes and things, but Angela, we've covered it a couple times, but if you can give kind of a brief overview of where they can find you and how they can engage with you, one last time, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. Thank you. And really have enjoyed our conversation. So thank you, Joe. My website is angelafosterperformance.com. You can find the links to everything we've spoken about over there. My podcast is High Performance Health. That's available on all platforms. And then I'm on different platforms. I'd say the one that I'm most active on is Instagram. And that's where we share a lot of the science. We do a lot of carousels, which make it very easy for you to read and digest quickly. Yeah. And that's over at Angela S. Foster. And you can also, DM me there as well. I do check my DMs and reply. So it is me. Yeah.
Well, awesome. Thanks so much for joining the podcast today. And for everybody out there, if you have any questions, be sure to put those in the comments section, send them in. We'll do our best to answer them, but then we do have Angela's contact. We can either give you some of her resources to point you in that direction, or we can reach out on your behalf to get you some answers and connect you with Angela and her team. But thanks again, Angela, for joining us. Absolute pleasure. A ton of great nuggets. I'm really excited to get this as we get this episode out there and all the contents of it. And looking forward to helping a lot of people and keep everyone's health moving in the right direction out there. So thanks again. We'll see you guys. Take care.